It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to today's Holocaust Living History workshop. Thank you everyone for joining us today for this very special and marvelous event. I'm very confident that it will be marvelous. I already heard a little snippet of the wonderful music we'll hear the other day. Thank you also to the UCTV video team for all their work recording this event. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Mitchell, Eric, to the podium, as it were. Eric?
Thank you, Suzanne, and good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us tonight. It is my pleasure to acknowledge that tonight's event is sponsored by the Lou Dunst Memorial Lecture Endowment. As many of you know, Lou was a Holocaust survivor from Czechoslovakia and one of San Diego's best known and beloved survivors. From the establishment of the Holocaust Living History Workshop in 2008, he was an integral part of the program and repeatedly shared his experiences with students, staff, and our community. After his passing in 2015, Lou's widow, Estelle, continued her support for the workshop. Committed to keeping Lou's memory alive, Estelle established the Lou Dunst Memorial Lecture, and she was present at the naming of the Lou Dunst classroom in Geisel Library. Sadly, Estelle herself passed away a few years after her husband. Today, it is with gratitude and affection that we remember and pay tribute to both Lou and Estelle. Lou, who grew up speaking Yiddish, would undoubtedly have enjoyed today's program. Now, let me turn the mic and the stage over to my colleague, Amelia Glazer, who is going to introduce tonight's performers. Amelia?
Thanks so much for having me, and I'm really honored to be able to introduce and welcome Professor Anna Shternshis and Psoy Korolenko to UC San Diego. Both are exceptionally creative minds and talented scholars, and I first met both of them about 20 years ago, give or take. The project that they are going to present, Yiddish Glory, the Lost Songs of World War II, is a project that centers on music that was written during World War II. And in the midst of this incredibly dark period in history, an ethnomusicologist by the name of Moisiej Bierugovsky, together with his team of scholars, discovered songs that had been written by Jewish Red Army soldiers, by refugees, by victims and survivors of ghettos. Yiddish Glory, the project that resulted, was nominated for a Grammy. It was probably the first Yiddish academic project nominated for a Grammy. It's been widely recognized and appreciated with numerous accolades. It also received the Moscow-based Fiddler on the Roof Award. But just a couple of words about both Professor Shternshis and Psoy Korolenko. I first met Professor Shternshis, I think in Vilnius, now Lithuania, in 1998, when we were both students of the Vilna summer program. Got to know her better when we were both graduate students at Oxford, where she ended up earning her DPhil in Modern Languages and Literatures in 2001. Anna was doing this fantastic research into how Soviet Jews coded Jewishness. She would later go on to write a book called Soviet and Kosher, Jewish Popular Culture in the Soviet Union, 1923 to 1939, which came out in 2006. I make my graduate students read this habitually. My favorite example from this book is one of her subjects who discusses a recipe for how to make kosher pork. You just have to add a little sugar. She's also the author of When Sonia Met Boris, an oral history of Jewish life under Stalin, as well as numerous other really, really fantastic articles and work. Professor Shternshis holds the Al and Mala Green Professorship in Yiddish Studies and directs the Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto. She's just completed a term as the co-editor-in-chief of East European Jewish Affairs, together with the late David Schneer. It's really been a pleasure to work with her on some projects around this journal. Anna is currently a Guggenheim Fellow, and we're really happy that she can join us amidst her research. Her other awards include a number of things, but I'll just mention a couple. The President's Impact Award at the University of Toronto, as well as the Israel Bond Women's Division Award. So really a pleasure to have you here, Anna. I've wanted to bring you to San Diego for a long time. Psoy Korolenko, who sometimes goes by his original name, Pavel Leon or Pasha, I've also known for many years. In fact, I don't know whether you remember this or not, Pasha, but I remember a conversation in the middle of the night aboard a boat on the Neva River in St. Petersburg during one of the summer klezmer festivals. I think it must have been around 2007 because I just started working at UC San Diego. And I, hypothetically proposed that we ought to bring him to San Diego and didn't actually manage to make good on this proposal until a couple of years ago when we first brought him to give a concert on revolutionary music, which completely packed the loft. We had to turn students away. Psoy wrote a dissertation about the Russian writer Vladimir Galaktionovich Korolenko. This is where the musical Nom de Plume comes from. But he has performed on stage since 2000. He's published one book of selected essays and song lyrics, the hit of the century, as well as 14 CDs. Some of these are in collaboration with other musicians. Opa is one of them with Daniel Kahn, Igor Krutogolov. Psoy is a member of the organizing committee for a Russian-American music festival called Jetlag, which is held annually. Psoy is also known for his explorative vision of the art of translation, and he shared some of this with us at his last concert at UCSD. Tradaptation is the concept of the art of translation musically, and also what he calls spell art. And that is, playing with foreign texts, emphasizing linguistic distances and multilingual songs. He sings in a number of languages: Russian, Yiddish, English, French, Spanish, among other things. So without further ado, it's such a pleasure to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation tonight.
Thank you, Amelia. And honestly, like every time I start thinking when we met, like how many years ago it was, I wish like we should add 10 years to that. We'll still look impressive and yet will make us feel more relevant and more contemporary. I'm really excited to be here and present this program with you. 26 years ago, librarians of the Ukrainian National Library in Kiev, led by Lyudmila Sholokhova, discovered 15 unnamed boxes filled with handwritten Yiddish documents that looked something like this in a dark corner of their basement, which was located in the church, actually. It turned out that these papers were long presumed lost archive left behind by Soviet Jewish ethnomusicologist named Moisey Beregovsky, who Amelia just mentioned, and his colleague, linguist Ruvim Lerner. Sadly, the only picture I have of Ruvim Lerner is this mugshot when he was arrested by Stalin's government in 1950 for conducting this project that we're going to talk about today. Beregovsky, Lerner, and a number of other people spent World War II preserving Yiddish music, stories, and jokes from Jews living and dying in the Soviet Union, in ghettos, working in the home front, or serving in the Red Army. Most of the songs in this collection were created by women, many by children. Psoy Korolenko and I are the first team of an artist and a historian to work with these documents. And these documents are first and sometimes the only Jewish eyewitness accounts of the Holocaust in Ukraine, simply because in many places there were no survivors, or survivors did not live long enough to tell the stories. Only songs remained. Of 6 million Jews killed during the Holocaust, about 1.5 million were killed within the Soviet borders, and of them about 900,000 in Ukraine. None of the songs that was found in that archive have been known before. They have no parallel texts in famous collections of the Holocaust music from Warsaw, Lodz, Vilna, and other places where Jews lived and died in Europe. Some of the documents that we found in Beregovsky's collection are earth-shattering and heartbreaking at the same time. For example, there is a note written by a little kid who was interned in a very short-lived Berdichev ghetto. This is the monastery of Berdichev, a ghetto that existed only for a week or 10 days. And this is a town with a large Jewish community, where as soon as Germans invaded Berdichev, they rounded up all the Jews, put them in a monastery, and killed them within a few days. So the note is dated within that time frame. And, another person one of the people who was killed in that ghetto was a mother of Soviet writer Vasily Grossman, known for his very long novel, Life and Fate. So this note in Bergovsky's archive is very short, and it only says two things. Don't forget that we existed and how we died. And then it repeats in Yiddish 3 times. Vergess uns nicht, vergess uns nicht, vergess uns nicht. Do not forget us. There are also notes from places like ghetto of Kamenetsk-Podolsk, where 26,000 Jews from Hungary and nearby parts of Ukraine were also shot in August 1941. There are no survivors of a short-lived ghetto that was established in Kamenetsk-Podolsk right before that massacre. They had a ghetto later, but that's a different story. And we have a note written on the onset of that massacre. I'll show you that actual note. You see that it's written in Russian with children's handwriting, because it was a child that wrote it in a very bad Russian full of mistakes. It's a remake of a famous Russian song that says, why was I so misfortunate to be born? But it describes in detail, as many as possible, what was going on in Kamenetsk-Podolsk ghetto. That's the only document we have from that place, from that time. Bergovsky and Lerner planned to publish these materials in a volume called Jewish Creativity in the Soviet Union During the Great Patriotic War. You see this beautiful, sexy cover of that volume on your screen. You see, like it was all typed out. Even went through one round of censorship in Stalin's Soviet Union, but it was never published. So today, we will share some of the songs that were included in this volume and some that were not, and tell you extraordinary stories behind them. Now, because we're presenting this program in the midst of the pandemics, we thought we would pay more attention to how people made sense of epidemics and diseases during the war. To be honest, we didn't have to look too hard to find examples. Epidemics of cholera, dysentery, tuberculosis, outbreaks of measles, and especially typhus transmitted via fleas and human lice literally plagued Jews imprisoned in ghettos all over Poland, Ukraine, and Transnistria. Transnistria alone, this is the area of contemporary Ukraine and Moldova between rivers Bug and Dniester. Many of 200,000 Jews who died there during the war died from starvation and diseases, as well as cold weather. Many stories and songs that you will hear today tell us how people made sense of their lives during those scary months between summer of 1941 and the end of 1943. Especially during the winter of 1941, the coldest one in recorded history of European winters of the 20th century, when pandemics became major killers. So our first song is called Transnistria Lullaby. It was recorded in 1945 by Bergovsky from 6 different kids, but you have 2 examples here on the screen for you. One of those children was named Ruth Uplanger. She was a student of the 5th grade of school number 18 in the town of Chernovets. And another one was from a child, I don't know the gender, Elvina Kaur. They both said to Bergovsky that they heard that song in winter of 1942. If you look on the screen closely, you will see that these songs are written in Yiddish with handwritten. These are these children who wrote it in those notebooks that they used in schools. And that's because after they sang the words to Bergovsky, he always asked them to write down the words to make sure he didn't miss any. So these are the documents that are the original handwriting of those children who survived the Holocaust in Transnistria and wrote down those long songs with this beautiful handwriting right after the war in 1945. I will explain later why kids were such an important part of sources for Berezovsky, but for now, please welcome Psoy Korolenko with the Transnistria Lullaby.
Sleufen Jugend die Maschinen, eines voll der Zug. Mir verjugte sitzen drinnen, man schickt ins Zebug. Mir verjugte sitzen drinnen, man schickt ins Zebug. Dorten winkelt der breiter Dniester, schika gris mir zu. Fin mein Momen in mein Schwester, wo sonnen du, schein du. Fin mein Mome mit mein Schwester, wo sonnen du, schein du. In dort hoben wir gefinnen, and hingeneut in der scheiner Ukraine, jetzt regiert der Teut. In der scheiner Ukraine, jetzt regiert der Teut. Und hingerkalten, doi das auch gebracht, doi da so viel bringen selten, kein mehr größter Schlacht, doi da so viel bringen selten, kein mehr größter Schlacht. Kaiver ken matseive is farins nicht du. In a somen riva groisen legt man ins Zeru. In a somen riva groisen legt man ins Zeru. Der Sturm deuert nicht ewig, und na wird der Krieg. Wieder wird die Sonne scheinen, unser ist der Sieg. Wieder wird die Sonne scheinen, unser ist der Sieg. Dann kämen wir befreite in der Rolte Reim. Los die Teute, bade Teute, wieder wird das Leben sein schein. Los die Teute, bade Teute, wieder wird das Leben sein schein.
I will clap for Psoy for all of you. I know you want to. In addition to typhus, this dark lullaby talks about the deportation of Jews from Bessarabia and Bukovina into the northern parts of Transnistria. During winter 1941-42, Romanian soldiers kicked out 150,000 Jews from their homes and forced them to walk to Dniester's shore. Tens of thousands of people died on their way from starvation and cold. Many of them ended up in ghetto in Bershad, located in Vinnytsia region of Ukraine. People lived there under the constant threat of death from hunger, infectious diseases, and harassment from the Romanian police. Frida Muchnik, one of the survivors of that ghetto, mentioned in her interview done in the early 2000s for the Centropa project that girls were in especially biggest danger in that ghetto because, as she said, they were abused in beastly manner. She survived because her mom was hiding her from the very beginning and no one knew she was there in the basement of their house. The mom, who is pictured here as well, the mom kept bribing the members of the Jewish council of that ghetto, as well as Romanian police, so that they look the other way and don't look in the basement. Sometimes they didn't honor the bribes and went to the basement, but she bribed them anyway. Bribery was part of everyday life of that ghetto. And our next song was recorded from a woman who also a young woman who survived that ghetto. Her name is Genia Soifer. Let me see. And she was 18 in 1945. I don't have a photograph of Genia Soifer to show you. Only this handwritten paper where she wrote the words of the songs that you're about to hear now. We don't have her photograph, but we have something else. Frida Muchnik could not remember a single member of the Jewish Council or Romanian police who her mom bribed. But Genia Soifer's song, recorded in 1945, spared no details of who exactly took the bribes and why, and also what she wished on them for that. So welcome back, Psoy, with the song In the Cold Days by Genia Soifer.
In die Tag, in die kalte Atmen, wir gehen im Kindbalte, ai, 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 ai. Wenn sich von dort entlaufen, hat man mich in der Heim getroffen, ai, 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 ai. Wie ich kim nur unater, hab mich bald der Plutoner, ai, 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 ai. Du Adriatinater, hab mich bald a Gendarmer, ai, 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 ai. Hat man dem zu zeigen, nehmen mich in Walz auf Rang geschickt, ai, 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 ai. Bin ich doch von dort entlaufen, hat man mich nach Heim getroffen, ai, 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 ai. Wie ich me klappt in Tier, se gehen Polizei näher vier, ra, 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 ra. Fin im Bettel in Sekretel is gewein a groß der Schreckl, ai, 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 ai. Perlmutter Sekretar schreit jeden git Chabar, ra, 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 ra. Vilnitz ist doch basig stolz, hackt in Priture Holz, ai, 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 ai. Perlmutter der Kurnosser trug den Bald der Nemmer, was ai, 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 ai. Das Chabarot ihr geniemen, in Kind bald sein Tier gekommen, ra, 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 ra. In die Tag, in die kalte, hat man mich geniemen, Kind bald, ra, 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 ra. Bin ich sich von dort entlaufen, hat man mich in der Heim getroffen. Ai, 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 ai.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Pasha. And I do want to say that the Perelmuter, who's mentioned in that song, was a businessman from Bukovina who himself was deported to Bershad in the fall of 1941. And he was in charge of food distribution there, so he got a lot of hate his way, obviously. Gradually, Bershad ghetto became one of the largest ones in Transnistria. By the fall of 1941, there were 25,000 people there. By August of 1942, only 10,000 people remained, with 150 to 200 dying daily during that awful time. Many of them died from typhus. Every day, a man with a horse buggy picked up bodies and dumped them in the cemetery, the photograph of which you see here. They were only buried in the spring of 1942 when they could dig a little and put them underground. The bodies. The problem of typhus was not just an internal ghetto problem. Nazi authorities, both Romanian and Germans, did not want disease to spread over the occupied territories. Jews were the easiest to get rid of to control the epidemics. Not once and not twice, Romanian authorities came to the leaders of ghettos and said if the typhus was not under control, all residents of ghetto would be killed right away. And they actually acted on this. 50,000 of Jews of Bogdanovka, for example, were killed in 1941 to prevent pandemic. In order to save ghettos, residents of ghetto, Jewish council authorities, Jewish leadership, as well as medical specialists, had to think fast on how to deal with this. It was not an easy task. They didn't have medical supplies, no abilities to isolate sick people, not enough wood or coal to heat people's houses, and a very strict timeline with their and thousands of other people's lives at stake. Sometimes they succeeded. For example, in Shargorod, a small town also in Vinnytsia region of Ukraine, in 1941, 2,000 local Jews and 5,000 deportees from Bessarabia were put in ghetto. This is some of the remnants of it. According to historian John Anshel, typhus killed 4,000 people in Shargorod. The Romanian authorities threatened to kill everyone else unless things are under control within 3 weeks. So ghetto authorities set up a hospital, then another one, then public toilets, showers, and bathhouses. It helped a little bit, but not to the extent that they needed. So finally, somebody had an idea to build a soap factory and sell the soap both to ghetto residents and to outside villagers. And that saved the ghetto. The result, the pandemic died down, and epidemiologists today who specialize in mathematical modeling, words that are sadly too familiar to us now, calculated that doctors and soap makers working in Shargorod saved thousands of lives. 12 out of 27 doctors who were in that ghetto died themselves while treating typhus victims. So our next song is about this enemy called typhus louse. It often happens that the worst tragedies are preserved not through tragic songs or stories, but rather through humor. Humor that helps people to live through the worst possible situations. In fact, about a quarter of all songs that Beregovsky preserved from those ghettos were humorous. And this one is an example of such humor. As you can see, it condemns lies and also praises the real heroes of that ghetto, the doctors. Now, this song for our program is pre-recorded in today's COVID situation, both by Psoy Korolenko, and you will see it's him who's singing because you just heard him sing live. But in this song, he performs it together with Toronto-based group called Payadora Tango. So this is the original document of the song. Now I'll show you Payadora Tango. The tune for this song was originally written by David Begelman, Polish composer who himself died in Auschwitz in 1945. And Toronto-based musicians, Drew Jureka, and his colleagues performed it for us, and Drew also arranged it for this performance. So you will see on the screen Drew Jureka himself, violinist Rebecca Folkstein, pianist Robert Horvath, and double bassist Joseph Phillips. And of course, Psoy performing the song, and they all pretended to be lice. So that's the decoration. So.
bin ich Emirate fürs Lois, geh ich mir für Lois zu Heus, tra la 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 la. Wie ich komm nur dort zu gehen, ist schon bach Quarantäne, tra la 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 la. Wie ich komm nur dort zu gehen, ist schon bach Quarantäne, tra la 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 la. Da Jugend nicht zu alt, will ich mir schön alt und schwach, tra la 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 la. Nur der Remes von der teure Form, Doktor, ob ich meure, tra la 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 la. Nur der Remes von der teure Form, Doktor, ob ich meure, tra la 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 la. Nur der Remes von der teure Form, Deutsch, ob ich meure, tra la 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 la. Van Deutsch heute immer erzähl ich und die Kosaken mit der Reich, tra la 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 la. Van Deutsch heute immer erzähl ich und die Kosaken mit der Reich, tra la 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 la. Nor Polizei bloß man ruhig a Schem, als man schickt a Chura heim, tra la 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 la. No fortje mir gesund von Tonnen, ich will mich nehmen zu des Sonnen, tra la 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 la. Oi fortje mir gesund von Tonnen, ich will mich nehmen zu des Sonnen, tra la 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 la.
So I hope you smiled a little when you watched this, and we're back to horror stories. One of the scariest places in Transnistria was a camp named Pechora, located in a town with the same name in Vinnytsia region. And Romanians occupied this beautiful town, which was also known as Switzerland of Ukraine, at the end of July 1941. And in September 1941, Romanian authorities converted the summer estate of the aristocrat Pototsky family in Pechora, which you can see a little bit of it on your slides, and also a former sanatorium for the Red Army soldiers, into a death camp for Jews. It was fenced, it was hard to get out, hard to get in, and above all, no food was delivered there. The goal was death through starvation. 4,000 people died there between 1941 and 1943, and others were on the way there. Prisoners called the place Dead Loop, referring to the closed fences and to the fact that it was on the high, steep shore of the river Bug. There are no photos of Pechora from that time, but there are many of the present. The one that you see looking at now are actually, I took them from TripAdvisor. The place functions again as a sanatorium. It advertises massages and baths, and actually unique microclimate, because apparently those fumes from those rivers are very good for you. And in order not to upset vacationers too much, there is on the very side door of the entrance to the Pechora, there is this plaque, which you see with the white thing on black, is a plaque that says that people were murdered there. And it commemorates what happened here 70 years ago, when thousands of Jews from nearby Tulchin, Bratslav, and other places of Ukraine were deported there only to die from typhus, starvation, and other diseases. Songs created in Pechora and the ones that survived in Bergovsky's archive call it the place from where no one comes back alive. In fact, survivors of Pechora say that when people started dying from typhus there, they were first buried in a nearby Jewish cemetery, but then it got really full. So again, like in Bershed, they buried them all together later in spring. And what you see on the right of the slide is a sign that says mass grave or brother's grave that commemorates that place where people died from typhus. They were also afraid to bury them in nearby villages because locals were afraid of the pandemic. Many Pechora prisoners were children. They were lifelines for others because they were small enough to smuggle outside of the camp and beg in nearby villages. They could also go down the river and get a little bit of water. And some of them also survived to tell the story, and Berigovsky got them and recorded those songs from them. One of those kids' name was Yosef Broverman, who came to Pechora from a town in Ukraine named Tulchin. I put a photograph of some sites of Tulchin for you because I don't know how you imagine Ukraine. I definitely don't imagine it with such a classicist style palace as it is, but this is Tulchin. And before the war, about 3,000 Jews lived in Tulchin. Only 20 of them lived to see 1944. And that person, Yosef Broverman, was one of those survivors. He didn't come back to Tulchin after the war. And in Pechora, he lost his parents, both of whom died from typhus. And he wrote a song to commemorate their death. And, he also wanted to talk about the town of Tulchin, which he missed a lot. And he spoke about you will hear in a second about the road that Tulchin residents had to take to Pechora. They had to walk about 15 to 20 kilometers there. And, by coincidence, one of my classmates with whom I studied in Moscow many years ago in high school, Nikolai Gotza, actually comes from Tulchin. And he's not Jewish. He was born in 1974, like I was. And, we were just talking about Tulchin and about Yiddish history that was there. And he said to me, well, I knew there was a Jewish community, but I didn't know anything about this. So anyway, we read some of the memoirs of survivors from Tulchin together. And he said, wait a second. They were walking on Komisarov Street from Tulchin to Pechora. This is the street on which I grew up. Nothing changed there since the war. So this is a photograph he took for me, and I want to show you the snowy road of Tulchin on which people walked to Pechora. And next to it is a photograph of the vegetable processing plant that was built right before the war. So this chimney was probably the last thing that Tulchin Jewish residents saw before they left Tulchin for good. And now, please welcome back Psoy with a song called Tulchin.
Kommt heute einmal noch der Monen, unser früher dicke Zeit, unser Maso, unser Leben. Was hat uns amul gescheint? Unser Mucke, unser Weinen, und Aschir und Onanek. Oi, oi, meine junge Jorn, gehen nicht dem Deutsch weg. Nur darum die junge Bäume wachsen, Zweigen werden grün. Und einmal so gezwittert unser Leben in Tulchin. Kommt die Zeit und von die Bäume flieht der schöner Zwitter ab. Punkt so durchs lichte Klappen. Geht bei uns a Zwiete ob, wo du stehst nicht, wo du gehst nicht, on a Schir und on a Meg. Es wird noch scheinen unser Leben in die früher dicke Tag. Hoi die Ernte ist so im Blonschen sich allein herum. Und das blutig Wort gestorben, wo du kommst, ist Menschen fallen wie die Fliegen, nur vor Hunger und vor Kält. Unser Mucke, unser Zorn, wissen wir durch ganze Welt. Keiner soll nicht sein Verfall, das schuldig Jiddisch Blut. Was wird das sind vergessen in Europa beim Bandit? Nur derweil se gäumen Menschen in Petschere auf dem Weg. Los uns scheinen das lichte Kleben, wie in die frierdike Tag. Lo mir entfernen die Mörderbrüder mit der Widerstand. Lo mir Brüder sei besorgen mit Windhofkes in der Hand.
Thank you, Pasha. This is one of the few songs that you hear today that didn't come, we performed with a different tune. Of course, some of you recognize the tune written by Fred Schnittke already after the war, but there is a reason for that, which I can address in Q&A if people are interested. But meanwhile, I want to talk about Windhofkes, which is a Yiddish word for rifles. Because next I want to talk about another chapter of Soviet Jewish history is reflected in those songs, and that is 500,000 Jews who served in the Red Army. What we learned from this archive, and this is something we did not know from thousands of oral histories of Soviet Jewish war veterans, and that is that during the war they sang in Yiddish about their experiences. Many of them sang about revenge. In fact, a lot of the songs were very angry, and they called on soldiers to abandon their human side and see enemy as an animal that has to be killed as opposed to a human. A person who came up with this slogan, by the way, was a Soviet journalist, also of Jewish origin, named Ilya Ehrenburg, who was by far the most famous Soviet journalist of his time, who published an article in 1941 called Kill the German. New York Times, when it republished it, made it a little bit more politically correct and called it Kill the German. In Russian, it's called simply Kill. And, this article just called on soldiers to kill without mercy. A lot of songs written in the Soviet Union during this time essentially took lines from this article and sang them because it became so popular and resonated with so many people, including songs that were created in Yiddish. Also, those Yiddish songs really praised weapons, rifles, pistols, rockets, because they helped them to fight against the army that targeted their people. Above all, Jewish soldiers sang loudly and clearly that Jewish men do not avoid fighting in the war. And they were fighting themselves against an anti-Semitic myth that spread during the time, and that is that Jews are sitting out the war in Tashkent and not fighting. So the songs are saying, no, we're fighting and we're fighting, we're using all these weapons. So praise of weapons is very prominent in the songs, and our next song that you will hear is actually called I Lie Beside My Machine Gun. Its original title was I Love My Machine Gun, but we changed it a little bit for contemporary sensibilities. It was collected by a man named Mendelman. Later after the war, he became quite a known Yiddish writer, also an artist, a friend of Marc Chagall. But during the war, he was a Polish refugee from Lodz who served in the Red Army, and as we learned from this archive, spent some time collecting songs from his fellow Red Army soldiers who were singing in Yiddish. So please welcome back Psoy with the song called I Lie Beside My Machine Gun.
Lieg ich neben Pulimjot und schöpfsche jiddischen Nigen. Warum ihr seid still, nur du in die Grieselig sich wiegen? Warum ihr seid still, nur du in die Grieselig sich wiegen? Der Mann sich man freilich Städtel, wer hat es nicht gekannt? Jetzt dieses Pustel Menschen, alle Stieber verbrennt. Nor sis do a reute Armee, hat sie mir a Pulimjot gegeben. Da schlag ich die Deutschen, kedei unser Volk soll doch leben. Schlag ich die Deutschen, kedei alle Völker sollen leben. Oh, ihr wisst die Menschenfresser, oh, ihr deutsche Banditen, hoi Pulimjot sie viel besser, sollst du kein Deutsch nicht euch mieten. Oh, ihr wisst die Menschenfresser, oh, ihr deutsche Banditen, hey, Pulimjot sie viel besser, sollst du kein Deutsch nicht euch mieten. Piff, paff!
As you noticed, thank you, Pasha. As you noticed, maybe there is a line that gets repeated twice in that song. One says, "I fight the Germans so that my people live free," and then so that all people should live free. So there is a story here. So I'm showing you here the document with typed up first, and then with some corrections. So those corrections are a result of censorship. Now, Berezovsky and his colleagues did not work, of course, in the atmosphere of academic freedom. It's not that they could record everything that they heard or publish everything that they heard, to say nothing of people who had to make decisions whether or not they sing songs to them. But in this particular song, Berezovsky was worried that it conveys too much of a nationalist feeling. It was all about defending Jews. It was all about missing Jewish life. And to Berezovsky, even this song, written in 1944 in Yiddish by a Jewish soldier, seemed a little too Jewish, a little too nationalist. So he didn't want to be accused in spreading Zionist ideas that could be read that way, or Jewish nationalist ideas. So my people were replaced with all people. And the song was not published anyway, and so it didn't help, but it's an interesting note from the time. Another thing that I want to say about this song is that this is Mendelman together with Mark Chagall, and his son, Tzvi lives in Israel, and I spoke to him not so long ago, and we talked about his father's literary works. Mendelman was extremely prolific. He wrote thousands of pages of novels and poems, most of them about his experience in the Soviet Union. There are a lot of details about a lot of things, about how he ran away from Lodz, how he got married in Rovno, how he ended up in Moldova, how he got drafted in the Red Army. There's a lot of things. One thing that he doesn't mention is that he was collecting songs about from Red Army soldiers. So when I first mentioned it to Tzvi, he says, well, maybe it was a different Mendelman. And then we looked at the documents together. When we looked at the documents together, you see here on the right side, you have it handwritten. Tzvi recognized his dad's handwriting. So of course it's the same Mendelman. And of course that tells us one more time that in this particular case, in the case of this archive, history and memory are simply telling very different stories of the past. Now we're going to move on and talk about another experience of Soviet Jews and also some Polish Jews, and that is survival in Soviet rear. About 1.4 million of Soviet Jewish citizens and 250,000 Polish Jews survived the war in Central Asia, Siberia, Ural Mountains, and other parts of Russia away from the front. It's a long story of how they ended up there. Polish Jews, sometimes Romanian Jews, but not to the less extent, often came under the Soviet rule between 1939 and 1940. Many of the business and religious leaders and political leaders of the Jewish community were arrested by Stalin's Soviet government and deported to jails. They were arrested because there were concerns about them being anti-Soviet. So those jails happened to be located in the faraway places of the Soviet Union, away from the war. So 300,000 Polish Jews who survived the war, 250,000 did so in the Soviet rear, many of them in places like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. There were also Soviet Jews who were evacuated by the Soviet government in those places because they worked in strategically important industries such as weapon making or food processing or other in the cloth making industries that were necessary for the Soviet war effort. Some Jews who ended up in Kazakhstan during this time were arrested by Stalin long before the war began. They were not Polish Jews at all as well, but they were arrested for religious activities or, for any other alleged crimes. One of those people was a man named Yakov Merzon. I wish I could show you his photo, but I don't have it. He was a teacher and then a former rabbi from Kryvyi Rog in Ukraine. He was arrested in 1937. And ended up in jail in Kazakhstan, from where he was released in 1944. And by that time, he was very sick. He lost all his teeth, and he had no money, so he was begging on the streets of Almaty. Kids, refugee kids, were making fun of him. They were throwing rocks at him and dirt at him. And at some point, he yelled at them and cursed them in Hebrew. One of those kids went back home, told their parents about a strange, scary beggar with no teeth who swears at kids in Hebrew. Parents went to investigate what's up, and they found out who he was and hired Yaakov Merzon to teach their kids a little bit of Aleph Beis, to teach them a little bit of Jewish alphabet and writing. As Yaakov Merzon was doing that, he was recording songs that he heard from those children. Because most of them were Polish refugees, some of them were Romanian refugees, and because he really didn't trust the Soviet regime. He didn't really trust the Soviet system. He was scared for himself and for those children. As he recorded their songs, he did not write a single name of a single child. So all of them are written down in that notebook as anonymous. At the end of 1945, he mailed that notebook to Moisei Beregovsky because he heard he was collecting this music. And in 1946, he died, not knowing whatever happened to this material. And what happened to that material is because of Yaakov Merzon, we now have living voices of Jewish refugees who were in Kazakhstan during the war. So the song that you will hear next comes from that notebook. I will show you a little bit of that later. It's called Purim Gifts for Hitler, and it is written by an anonymous child. I know Purim is a little bit far away, but the message of the song I hope will resonate with you.
Du bist nicht mein erster Sohn, hab gehabt das Sache Sohn, ich will noch verschreiben euch dein Namen in einem Zettel, wo seht sich nicht. Du bist nicht mein erster Sohn, hab gehabt das Sache Sohn, ich will noch verschreiben euch dein Namen in einem Zettel, wo seht sich nicht. Omen, oh! Antiochus, Turkvemade, Kruschewan, oben die Welt verchippest, früher noch vor dir. A langer Zettel, omen sie's voran, es wird nicht stehen, kein Papier. Hat ihr alle sich hat Ziel gestellt, mich ob zum Mappen von der Welt, nur nicht an euch ist es geschenkt. Stalin wird schon kurz an euch die Hand. Mein Friedler Heus hat mir verbrennt, hast du all meine Eifel gehängt, hast du meine Eifel getroffen und geschworen, mich Heus zu roten. Nur wild und narrisch ist dein Beiser treu. Wir wollen leben, sei wie sei, dein Sof wird sein auf Fomensbäum. Am Yisroel.
Thank you, Pasha. So before we move on to the next song, I'll just quickly tell you about this Amos Royal High, which I am sure you loved hearing. But you see, like when we worked with this song to start with, the song just ended off with Haman dying on a tree, and there was nothing about Amos Royal High. And it turns out that the original version, the handwritten, you see from the notebook of Merzon, actually had it. And this is how, once again, we see Berezovsky's going through censorship and changing the message of this song in order to fit the culture and where he had to publish those materials. In summer 1944, all workers of the Cabinet for Studies of Jewish Culture, where Berezovsky worked, returned to war-torn Kiev. Ukraine lost almost 900,000 Jews to Holocaust. In some areas, less than 1% of Jews survived. And during those 3 years that followed, from 1944 to 1947, Moisei Berezovsky, Ruvim Lerner, Hina Shargorodskaya, and some others went to conduct fieldwork in Ukraine and even went to a DP camp in Berlin. The goal of each trip was to collect stories and songs from survivors. One of the things that Berezovsky noted in his notebooks is what he saw was not just devastation, but the sense of emptiness. And we heard it also in Mendelman's song about Machine Gun. They felt like the places that they visited were empty. Now, of course, they were full with people. There were many people living in Shargard and Tulchin and Bratslav and Chernovtsi. It's just that they were empty of Jews. And it was very hard for them to also find people to interview and find songs from, because survivors were really afraid to talk about those experiences. According to Soviet legislation, those people who survived the war under the Nazi occupation had to prove that they were not collaborating with the German occupiers, especially if they were Jews, because the idea was that if a Jew survived the war, they must have done something so horrible against the Soviet regime that Germans left them alive. So most survivors could not prove that they did not collaborate. Most of them survived by a miracle. And instead, they were just hiding what happened to them, except for one group. And that one group are the group of people who are notoriously horrible at keeping secrets. If we were in person, I would have asked you what you think who this group is, but I will just answer my own rhetorical question myself. Of course, these were children. And Berezovsky went to schools and started asking them, Hanale, where were you during the war? She would say, I was in Tashkent, like parents would tell her. Hanale, do you know any songs? Sure I do. And Hanale would go on and sing all the songs about Pechora and Geta and all this. Berezovsky would ask, where did you hear that? She says, what do you mean where I heard it? I spent 3 years in that ghetto. And that's how he collected the bulk of the material that ended up in this archive. But emptiness was still bothering him. And what also he was looking for, and was very hard to find from kids, and that is the sound of music. So far, everything you heard was recorded on paper, sometimes with notations, but Berezovsky was also desperately looking for people who could play some instruments. And he was a trained ethnomusicologist, actually the first person in the world to have a PhD in ethnomusicology, written on the material of klezmer music, which was awarded to him in Moscow in 1943. By the way, the next person in the world who got a PhD in ethnomusicology based on klezmer music was Han Kuznetsky, which happened in Boston in the 1970s. And so Berezovsky was very interested in finding those tunes. Whenever he could find them, the ones that survived the war, he would write them down. One of such tunes, the instrumental tune with no words, was called Parom, a boat ship. He recorded it from a musician in 1945, although originally the tune was recorded in 1907. So it's a very old it's in a very old piece. So today we decided to present it for you for the first time since 1945 in the form of an instrumental performance, performed exactly as recorded by Berezovsky, by Toronto-based cellist Beth Silver, who got this piece of paper. You will see, like, this is how it looks like, from Berezovsky, and then made a performance out of it. So today is the world premiere of this piece, which gives us a chance to hear exactly what Berezovsky heard in 1945 in some unknown performer in Chernovtsi. World premiere. Our next song is more optimistic. It was recorded in 1947 from a survivor of an unknown ghetto in Transnistria, but from a person named Urintsov. He performed that song at a concert that was a spontaneous concert that was organized to celebrate victory in World War II. It was set, we don't know exactly what tune it was set to, so Psoy is using his imagination, but we do know that this song speaks of words that truly resonate with us today. It celebrates victory and hopes for the world with no fascism. So please welcome Psoy back, hold on a second, with a song called The Victory Song.
Es wird kommen euch die Ende von Leiden und von Pein. Gott, das sie wird ihr klappen und kritzen mit die Zehen. Was hier sind da so schlecht mit uns gewehen. Da klatsche glossen Gläsel und nehmt das Weibelräsel und geht mit mir a Tänzel der Fahr. Weil so viel sich gießen und Brampfen so viel fließen und mir gehen a jiddischen Bulgar. Da seid sich mesamayach und trinkt sie euch was mehr, weil die Deutschen Mörders will mir schon mehr nicht sehen, das sowjetische Land mit der stalinischen Hand wird weisen, was es kennt. Trinkt sie euch Lachayim vor der Reuter Armee und wünsche wird sie alle als gesund sei sollen sie und wünscht dem Chaber Stalin soll sein mit Jorasach, weil auf der ganzen Welt ist keiner zu ihm gleich Lachayim.
Okay, now I finally saw the messages on my Zoom saying that we're way over time, so we're going to just wrap up. I'll say one last thought and then open it for Q&A if you still have energy for that. The book that Berezovsky and Lerner and his colleagues prepared with all the songs and stories was never published. Hitler was gone, but Stalin, who the songs praised, as you heard just now, changed his attitude to Jews and government began to persecute them. In 1949, the Cabinet for Studies of Jewish Culture was closed. In 1950, Moisei Berigovsky was arrested and only released from jail in 1956. Ruvim Lerner was arrested in 1951 and also released in 1956. Both of them, this is Berigovsky 1950, right after he lost his job. This is when he came out from jail. Berigovsky died thinking that his work during World War II has been lost forever. Like biblical Moses, who never got to see the promised land. He never got to see his songs being performed anywhere, let alone across the globe from his native Ukraine, let alone on Zoom. So today, we wanted to thank him and praise his heroic efforts that preserve the voices of people singing for the darkest chapter of modern Jewish history. Yes, it's 70 years after the archive was closed, but the songs did see the light of day, and they made it to San Diego via technology. And we want to thank Emilia Glazer of the University of San Diego, Eric Mitchell, Suzanne Hillman, Yekta Mohammadi, Marcy Bretz, Lynn Burstein, and everyone in San Diego for making that happen. I also want to thank Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada and the University of Toronto that supported this research for the past 6 years. Above all, we're grateful to you for your attention tonight. And we are finishing up with a song that celebrates the return to normalcy, when Jews finally stop laughing at Hitler and start laughing at themselves. This is a song that Berigovsky and his colleagues recorded in a German DP camp, and the humor is at the Jewish relief organizations that helped survivors there. Thank you, and after Psoy is finished with the song, I will stop sharing screen, and you're welcome to ask questions.
Angekommen kein Berlin, nicht daher und nicht dahin. Immer fort, und man sitzt noch auf ein Ort. Man läuft zum Joint, man läuft zum Reben. Kennt sich nicht kein Eize geben. Sagt mir, wie es lieber roh, was wird sein mit uns der Sof. Lieber Brüder, nur betochen, mir zerschämen noch ein paar Wochen, Weste sein auf jener Seite und find dort ist schon alright. Und in Joint, der starre Pios, geht ins nicht kein End für einen Vapros. Man sucht ihm, ist solchen Weg? Meint es ist okay. Sag nicht, es ist noch gut. Was du a Buche für Sachnut, ist nur a Chwatkriat, gibt a Zertifikat. Noch a Regenschein, die Sonne, weiß mir schon lang davon. Verliert man Tag in den Mut, aber mit Jäckes ist kaputt. Aber Berlin ist stark zerstört, liegt ein Eil in der Erde, und ich es Ruhe tanz und schrei, eure Am Israel Chai. Lang wollt noch gewinn mein Lied, nur ich bin schon etwas mit. Es wird sein, dahin und dahin. Retraos, adieu, goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you both very much. That was a truly wonderful and moving program. And I hope, Anna and Pasha, you will be able to read the comments. There are some very nice and appreciative comments there. So we have a couple of questions, probably more. I see the number increasing. So the first question is from Deborah for you, Anna. What did you mean when you said that history and memory tell different stories? Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So what I mean by that is this. We have a lot of sources on Soviet Jewish war experience that that come from people. Oral histories. For example, a Shoah Foundation recorded thousands of interviews with Soviet survivors of the Holocaust. Blavatnik Project recorded over 1,000 interviews with Soviet Jewish war veterans. There are projects like Fortunov Archive at Yale that again interviewed the survivors on different topics. And a lot of them talk about what happened to them during the war. And not a single person, well, I mean, I didn't read all thousands, but I read a lot. Not a single person mentions a single one of these songs. None of the songs survived in popular memory. And, we're taught to think about music goes last. People would remember music because that's how our brain is wired. Our stories are told from music, but that is not what happened there. People were asked about music and they just did not remember it. And so that's one thing. Another thing is there are a lot of things that in the documents of the time mattered. For example, who exactly was taking bribes in those camps? Who was a hero? Who was a villain? These people are named with their first and their last names in these songs. In later day oral history interviews, very rarely people, talk about those names. If they talk about Jewish villains, people who maybe are Romanian Jews who ended up in those ghettos or Bessarabian, Bukovinas, and, there was a lot of tension between the groups, people will not be named because that doesn't seem appropriate to talk about this kind of hostility in today's world. So, but the songs, they don't know yet what will be appropriate, so they talk about it. Another thing we see in this music that we don't see in today's, in later kind of testimonies is the story of revenge. These songs are very angry. They're very graphic in description of violence. They don't have an idea what it means, never again. Like today, when we talk about Holocaust, we talk about never again. A concept that means we have to learn what happened, we have to know our history, and then we have to move on. Well, the sentiment in that time is we have to know what happened and we have to kill everyone who's killing us. So today, that kind of stuff, sensitivity does not come across well and doesn't show up as often in oral histories, but it's very prominent in songs like this. So history and memory, in my view, are telling these different versions of that history. So I hope it answers your question, Deborah, but if not, then I can follow.
Thank you. We have another very interesting question from Greg, and this is a question for both of you, I think, or maybe primarily for Pasha, I'm not sure. If you only had the lyrics, how did you reconstruct the accompaniment? How did you reconstruct the melodies for these songs?
There were several different directions which depended on some details. For example, some songs actually did really point at some known popular Yiddish or Soviet or Jewish Russian Soviet song by some lines which were obviously quotations. But some other songs we had to reconstruct, reimagine. The basic idea was that a simple amateur author would create the song using popular tunes, Soviet tunes, their Soviet education, and very much, to much extent, songs from films. Many films were popular among soldiers. Some films were about war. Some films were featuring characters which were actually, they latently performed the Jewish identity. For example, Mark Bernas's character in the film, two battlers, two warriors, actually features a central character who is obviously Jewish, though it's never been mentioned in the movie. He's from Odessa. His name is Arkady, which is some kind of a Russian name, but popular among Jews at that time, and so on. And he would sing songs, and these songs were popular, part of popular culture in the Soviet Union, which was influenced by the Jews and which influenced the Jews. So it has a significant Yiddish song influence in it, not necessarily because of the Jewish background of the authors. It was just one of the very important world trends at that time. It was connected with popular songs, with light variety song, with theater character songs, and cinematographic character songs. So we paid a lot of attention. To me, it was big inspiration. Songs like those that come from Mark Burness's repertoire and similar. Also, of course, there was a bunch of popular Yiddish songs, which are part of their heritage. We also considered such, like in the song about My Machine Gun, we used some sort of Jewish or Romanian Jewish doina for a melody, which is very intuitive, improv style. Also, we have heard some anachronisms in this program, such as Alfred Schnittke's melody, which was written for a Soviet TV show decades later after the war. But this is in the spirit. It's the character sings. Actually, it's based on Pushkin's play, which features a certain character whose little town was destroyed by plague. By Black Plague in Middle Ages. But in this case, we speak about what was called the Brown Plague. And this kind of devastation ballad, Churban Ballade as it were, it fits well, and it's in the spirit of the song. So that's why we used that one. So sometimes we were in a dialogue, not also with 40s, but also with later or contemporary voices, and it was some kind of reimagining the world of the implied amateur author by using their and our outlook, as it were, both. So it was some kind of chemistry, and this is what Daniel Rosenberg, who produced the actual album Yiddish Glory, is calling very to the point musical archaeology.
Oh, okay, yeah, this is fascinating. I'm so glad that Greg asked this question. Your answer was most illuminating. We have a question from Julie. Julie tells us that her parents are from the region of Bessarabia, Chotin, and Chernovitz. And she's wondering if you, Anna, know anybody from there.
So here's the story of Chernovitz. It's a kind of I don't know if you've been there, Julie, or but it's looks more or less like Venice. More or less like Vienna, but smaller and much cheaper. So it's a European city which had a large Jewish population before the war. That was a very assimilated, kind of sophisticated Jewish population. Almost nobody survived the war from the old Chernovitz Jews. People settled in Chernovitz after the war, but a lot of survivors from Transnistria, places that I was talking about, Chargorod and Bershad and Pechora and, Tulchin, like places that had Gerja they ended up in Chernovitz after the war. So I need to know more about the story of your family in order to know what happened. If they come from Bessarabia, it is, if they survived the war, most likely people were deported from Bessarabia to one of those ghettos. And in some of those ghettos, if they were lucky, a little healthier and younger, they survived. And after the war, went to live in Chernovitz. So that trajectory is possible. I have to look up what happened in Chotin, but most Jews who ended up in Chernovitz after the war were not from there originally. Very few survivors.
Thank you. We have one question. I think it was already answered, unless I misunderstood it, from Arthur. Where are you, Anna? I understood you're in Toronto, right? I don't know if this is a friend. You have to check out the Q&A afterwards.
Okay. Yes, I'm in Toronto. I'm at the University of Toronto, and that's where I'm speaking from. But I do have a funny remark here from Alon Weinberg, who says that we're boycotting Amazon. We're coming to the city. close to my heart. So I think you can buy it anywhere. I don't know if you're boycotting iTunes, but it's there as well. It's also on iCloud. And also, I guess it's not a super smart way for me to say that. You don't have to pay to listen to that music. It's available for free on the website called yiddishglory.com, where you can click, on the music, and all the songs will be there. And they're also English and Russian and Yiddish English Russian translations and Yiddish originals, both in Yiddish and Latin transcriptions on that website. So please, and also all of these songs are on YouTube. So if you put Yiddish Glory on YouTube, you will find them. Also, many of them are in form of a video, which is subtitled, which in my opinion is the best way to enjoy them.
Thank you, Anna. So all that remains is to thank you both from the heart, Anna and Pasha. That was truly wonderful. And I do wish we could have hosted you in person, but I thank you for being willing to be here in spirit, at least, in the musical spirit and other spirit. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Anna and Pasha. Thank you, Amelia, Eric, and the UCSD TV team. And thank you, our audience, for being here with us and spending your time with us. I wish you all a good night. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Ashenem Dank, and thanks, Suzanne. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Bye.